and welcome to Surreal Sermons, Episode 3. That was over with It Is Not Sound. Please be seated. Alright, so let's skip the preamble this week and straight into the announcement regarding that long-storied, long-in-the-making anthology, Vertigo Schisms. The big announcement this week, to follow up on last week's announcement that it's now going to have illustrations inside, is that it will in fact be a print book as well as Kindle now. It was originally supposed to be just an ebook like our original anthology was last year, but we have someone intimately acquainted with small press, publishing, who's going to help us put that out, and I'll have more information on that when I can. Wait till you see the illustrations that our guy is cooking up for this. He helped me think of the stories in a new way. Helped me picture some of the creatures in such deviations that I never would have thought of on my own. Joe Meredith is quite a talent and a credit to illustration. So that's all I really had to say on that front. No 10-minute monologue this week. Just wanted to get that news out there. And now I'm going to launch straight into the Douglas Lain interview this week because there's just too much to talk about to waste 1 minute this week. So I'll be right back with that information. And Douglas Lain has that all-too-rare, beautiful will to engagement. He enjoys poking and prodding, even if, by general standards, that's considered impolite. He is a true revolutionary in that he's willing to stand outside all categories and mostly just wants everything to be, well, awesome. And that comes from a frequent guest on Douglas Lain's Diet Soap podcast. His name is Daniel Coffeen. Any reaction to that, Doug?
Yeah, that's a great introduction. I'm pleased by it. How did you end up getting Coffeen to put that together for you?
I just solicited it from him.
That's cool. Yeah, no, he's a great guest on Diet Soap. He's one of my favorite regular guests. He and I don't always see eye to eye, but he's always a good conversationalist and a fascinating thinker. So I'm glad to get such a nice introduction from him.
Okay. Now, to start, let's give a little background. How long have you been writing, first of all? You came from a strict science fiction background, correct?
Yeah, I guess that's right. I've been writing since, well, my first published short story was in 91 or 92. I actually wrote it in 1990. I started trying to get published when I was a senior in high school, so I'm an old guy. That was about 1989. And at that point, I didn't think of myself as a genre writer at all. I just was going to be one of the great American novelists or something like that. But then around 95, I went to Clarion and tried to adapt myself to the science fiction and fantasy genres and publish there.
And you recently, well, not recently, but at the beginning of the millennium, you tapped into the Bizarro movement. Now, what are your thoughts on the Bizarro movement? You released a book of short stories entitled Fall Into Time, and also a novel for Eraserhead's main imprint called Wave of Mutilation. You're right there in the middle of this burgeoning movement. What are your thoughts on it? Where do you fit into it?
Well, you ought to ask Cameron Pierce that more than asked me, because I was approached by him. He lives in Portland, and we became friends, and he asked for some of my work. I guess he liked my short story collection from Nightshade Books back in 2006, and was wondering what I was working on and if I had anything that he could publish. So I feel like I've been adopted by the Bizarro movement more than that I aimed myself at it. My feeling about Bizarro is that it follows in line with a lot of the avant-garde traditions that I'm interested in, meaning that it aims to shock bourgeois sensibilities and use juxtapositions to create new ideas and new feelings. But I'm not steeped in the genre, and I do think that what I'm aiming at is sometimes this may be a little not politic, but I'll say sometimes it's not as I'm not as obsessed with flatulence and breasts and all that kind of thing. And not quite. Sometimes Bizarro can be a little juvenile, but certainly not always. And but I consider myself to be in there because I'm somewhat surreal or irreal, and can't be placed anywhere else neatly. So, and because we have a similar fondness for the absurd.
Now, and not only are you an author, but also you've got about 5 podcasts going, I would say, right now, right? Between Diet Soap,
Yeah.
double feature review with, what is his name, Jim Ferris?
Yep, Jim Ferris.
You two have a great chemistry, I know that.
Yeah.
And then we have Pop the Program, formerly Pop the Left, the supplemental program, Talk Shoe, that's I guess generated after a Diet Soap discussion, and then one for Zero Books, your upcoming partnership with David Blacker of Zero Books, right? So that's
Now, Pop the Program has been put on semi-permanent hiatus, but the other podcasts are going. I don't think of the Talk Shoe conversations as a podcast, but I guess they really are. But that's a supplement to Diet Soap, and it's something I'm doing with one of the listeners of Diet Soap, Andy Marshall. We're reading Hegel's Phenomenology, and if we ever get through that book, I don't know what will happen to the conversations. We may pick up something else that's equally difficult, like Lacan or someone. But I'm really excited about doing a podcast with David Blacker for Zero Books and writing a book for them. And I've known Jim Ferris for 20 years now, and we've never been able to find a project where we could work together creatively for any sustained period of time. I think this may be it, this movie podcast that we're doing. And I play straight man to him in a couple of ways. But he's hilarious, and I'm just lucky to get him on the phone and let him do his thing.
Now, we have a picture of Doug Lain as the career science fiction author and the, I guess you could say, prolific podcast host, but we don't have an idea of the beliefs of Douglas Lain. And I know that you have quite a few beliefs to illustrate. First of all, there is quite a Marxist bent that is focused on with Diet Soap. And also, as you mentioned, you're reading the Phenomenology of Hegel.
Yeah, the Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel, and it's a very difficult book, but that ties in to the Marxist angle. I consider myself to be a wannabe Marxist, meaning I am not educated enough to be a full-fledged Marxist yet. Maybe one day, when I'm an old man, I'll be able to claim that full on as being a Marxist. Marxism is, of course, a tradition that doesn't have a great history, and there's certainly big parts of what's considered part of the Marxist tradition that I don't want to affiliate myself with. Basically, any part of the really existing socialist countries, I don't feel a strong affinity for. But Marx himself, the writer and the theorist and the thinker, is someone I'm fascinated by and inspired by. And so that's the reason I'm a wannabe Marxist. I studied philosophy as an undergraduate, and I kind of approach Marx as a philosopher, which I know would piss a lot of Marxists off, but it's how I approach it. And I find that it's fruitful and continually keeps me, engaged and trying to think things through.
Okay. What is it about capitalism that you think has just reached a dead end? And I don't disagree that it is, it is seriously deteriorating from the original intent. But how would we change it? And what is it about capitalism that you think it just bodes not very well for us?
Well, I think that capitalism as an economic system has inequity built into it. So it's not so much that I think that capitalism is reaching a dead end, but that I think that capitalism is a dead end for something else,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Enlightenment or modernity. So capitalism is a way of organizing the world and getting things done. It's in Marxist speak, it's a mode of production. You know, you go to work every day, you work for a wage, you make a certain number of things, you get paid, you go home, and then in order to survive, you spend your wages on things that other people have made in the market. It's not the worst system that we've ever had. There have been many that are far worse. In a lot of ways, it's a miraculous system because it's produced so many things and it's created a world full of wonder. But it is a dead end when it comes to the Enlightenment project because it takes something to be natural that is not. And what it takes to be natural is Marx calls value. But it's the surplus that's made in a working day. So that you get paid a wage for your work, but you transform the materials into something worth more than your wages and the original price of the material, and that's the surplus value. And that mode of production, that aim of production, is one which doesn't really have a good justification. So if you're going to be a modernist or be someone who's committed to enlightenment, which means finding out what's really true and what's the best way to live, you have to get beyond capitalist production.
And
I
so,
don't
so
I don't know
you
if that makes sense.
no, 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 no. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So you came to Marxism as a possible solution, but now do you ever foresee a future where we can apply the concept of Marxism practically to our lives? I mean,
I don't think that I do come to Marx for a solution. I come to Marx to try to understand the problem better, because what he was best at was explaining what capitalism is and how it works. He's got 3 volumes of Capital. I've read about them and read some of the first volume, but which is another reason I call myself a wannabe Marxist. But he was an engaged socialist who wanted to transform the world and create something that they called socialism or communism. But what he was best at was theorizing and explaining how capitalism worked and critiquing other socialists for not seeing past capitalism, for making claims or creating systems or demands that they thought were revolutionary, but which were actually still reliant on this mode of production that didn't go beyond the capitalist mode of production that they said they wanted to escape or go beyond. So it's, Marx's critiques of Proudhon, for instance, is a great place to start to understand how Marx is great as a critic of socialism, of other socialists, and as a critic and theorizer about capitalism. And there's an essay called The Critique of the Gotha Program, which is not too long and kind of gives you a good sense of what Marx is up to.
okay. And Hegel, what is it about Hegel that you see in life around you that you're trying to absorb?
Well, Hegel's much more directly useful for me as a science fiction writer than Marx is. I mean, I can get to a point where I understand Marx in a way that helps me write weird stories, but Hegel is weird from the get-go, and that's because Hegel was engaged in critiquing and trying to create a new system for philosophy, and philosophy for me boils down to trying to figure out just what it means to be an existing person. Like what is it to be a human being? What is reality? Which are two of the big questions that my favorite science fiction writer was asking all the time. Was Philip K. Dick. So for me, Hegel is a thinker that I can use to write in response to my favorite science fiction writer, Phil Dick. I can say, okay, here are all the problems that you were writing about in Valis or in Ubik or in the Transmigration of Timothy Archer or in whatever it was that became Total Recall, and I can answer you. I can write a story that takes where you're starting and goes to the next step because I've been reading the phenomenology. So the major problem for Philip K. Dick was the problem of perception. How do we know that what we perceive has any relationship to the real world? And Hegel is someone who comes along and tries to give a very complete answer to that question. How do we know reality? And his answer was, we know it through contradictions. We know it through oppositions, which is a weird answer and one that can scramble your brain in a way that I find kind of pleasurable, but maybe difficult to explain briefly on a podcast.
Right. Now, what do you, before we move on to your latest release, Billy Moon, I wanted to get your feeling on or your thoughts on the I don't know, commercialization of philosophy, really. With you've seen these books. If anytime you've been in a major retail chain of bookstores, I'm sure you've seen these in the philosophy section. There, it's popular culture and philosophy, Spider-Man and philosophy, Big Bang and philosophy.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is that a joke or?
First of all, I'm writing a book called How to Watch Star Trek, in which one of my goals is to explain Marx and Hegel and maybe the Frankfurt School philosophers through Star Trek references. So I'm as guilty as any one of these guys who writes these books like, The Simpsons in philosophy or Captain America in philosophy. My only problem with those books, if I have a problem with them, and I haven't read them all, would be that they are usually anthologies of essays where people of different philosophical bents will approach a TV show and use the TV show to explore their philosophical ideas and also more often even use their philosophical ideas to say something about the TV show. And the way I think about it is that we should be using all the popular culture stuff to try to understand the truth. And of course, that would mean Hegel. But we should try to use these television shows and the popular culture to make it easier to grapple with philosophical problems, rather than try to use philosophy to give us a better understanding of what the TV show is. Because I think the TV show is understandable on its surface, and it's useful. It's basically I go the other way around. It's like, use a TV show to help understand philosophy, help us understand that, rather than use philosophy to help us understand the TV show.
Okay. Now, as for Billy Moon, you released this through Tor Books at the around summer last year, I guess.
Yeah, in September of last year or August of last year. Mm-hmm.
And now it's about Christopher Robin Milne, the son of the Winnie the Pooh creator, and how he comes to lead a student revolution in Paris, France, at the end of the 60s, right?
Yeah, in 1968, in May of 68, he gets involved because of a fan letter in the student and worker uprisings and riots and occupations in May and early June of 1968. And it's a surrealist kind of book. It's a fantasy of kinds, and I enjoyed putting Christopher Robin into that moment in history, which he was not. He was around then, but he certainly in real life was never involved in May of 1968. But I wrote a fiction in which he was. And
is there a particular reason why you chose Christopher Robin to lead this revolt as your subject?
Well, yeah, I mean, he wasn't the real leader of the revolt, but he was involved in this novel. So there were other leaders. Daniel Cohn-Bendit was an actual real leader in 68, and there were others. And I didn't put him in that position. There was one moment where he led a march in the novel, but but why did I want him to be in Paris in '68? Um, Christopher Robin is someone who was known as being a child his whole life. He was a fictional character in his father's Winnie the Pooh stories. And as a real person, he spent a lot of his time trying to create his own persona, an adult persona, a mature and competent persona, to live a real life, you know. And I wanted to put this character who's associated with childhood in the middle of kind of a childish or youth-oriented revolt to see if, you know, he could redeem that moment in the same way that he ended up redeeming the fictional character that he had to live with, the fictional version of Christopher Robin.
Now, so he lived in that shadow for pretty much his whole life, and it really got to him, right?
Oh yeah, I mean it was something he had to struggle with. I don't think it overshadowed his whole life, but I think that especially as he entered young adulthood and then went to university, it was something he had to struggle with. Certainly as a child, it influenced him a lot to have his childhood be part of the popular imagination. And he wrote about his relationship with the Pooh stories and his relationship with his father and how he worked to overcome the definition of himself that he found in those books and he found in his father's poetry and the short stories. So his life was influenced by, in some ways, defined against those stories, but you know, it's not as though he was overwhelmed by the problem. I think he did a good job of solving it.
Okay. Now, you also give some of the stage in the book to two students, Gerard and Natalie. Natalie is obsessed with recreating the French novel. I guess the English translation is "Hello Sadness," and she's trying to recreate that through a semester at university in her life. And Gerard becomes convinced that the house at Pooh Corner is what he needs to recreate. I guess, but why are they so set on recreating these books in their own lives? Do you think that that's a statement on how we all try to reimagine ourselves as something more exciting?
Well, you know, it is maybe, but also at that time in Paris, there was a political and art movement called the Situationist International, led by a theorist named Guy Debord. And he had a technique called détournement, or derailing, where you would try to take bits of popular culture and cut them up and rearrange them into a more revolutionary version of themselves. You take advertising and turn it into slogans for the revolution. And this is one example. And so in my novel, these characters who are part of that movement, the Situationist movement, are given tasks by Guy Debord. And one of them is, for Natalie, is to detourn Francois Sagan's book, Hello Sadness, or Bonjour Tristesse. I think that's how you say it. And the reason he wanted her to deturn that book was a couple of reasons. One, it was an incredibly popular book in Paris, starting in 1954, and you know, it's an iconic book. She was a celebrity, and she represented a certain kind of notion of freedom, especially sexual freedom and liberation for women. So Guy Debord and his group saw her as basically bourgeois, and the kind of freedom that she was writing about as being way too limited. But the task then for Natalie would be to find what was really revolutionary, what really was liberating in that book, and bring it to life. In other words, taking the spectacle and using it against itself. And so that was the goal that Guy Debord gave my fictional character. And then he gave similar goals to Gerard.
Okay. Now, I'm definitely picking up a sense of magic realism throughout Billy Moon, and that's what separates it from your work with Eraserhead Press, is that it's a much more delicate kind of surrealism. Would you agree?
Yeah, I did make an effort to, in tone, to write a much more quiet novel than something like Wave of Mutilation, say, which is, I think, more. Well, the title alone shows you the difference, but it's more ham-fisted kind of postmodern weirdness in Wave of Mutilation, and I wanted to go slowly in Billy Moon, and that's the influence of the main character, really, trying to fit the mentality of the real life Christopher Robin with my own aims, and so in writing the kind of book that character would fit into. And also, it's written for a big mainstream press. I wanted to be a little more accessible with this book as well. I don't know how well I did with that, but that was the aim.
And what was how challenging was it writing for Tor Books? Who first tipped you off as to their interest? Who was interested first, you or them?
They were. I worked with Jim Frankel. And he, okay, so Joan Vinge, she taught me at Clarion West back in 95. And when my first short story collection came out in 2006, I wrote to her to thank her, basically. And I think I called, too, or something, to talk to her. She wasn't in, but I talked to her husband, Jim Frankel, and he was aware of stuff I was publishing in magazines and said, oh, well, you've got a book out. Well, why didn't you send it to me? Because he was an editor at Tor. And I said, well, it's a short story collection. He said, oh, well, no, yeah, I wouldn't want to look at that. He says, but if you ever write a novel, let me know. So I got very excited and thought, well, now I have to finish the novel I'm working on. And I ended up sending it to him. He didn't take that one, but he took this idea on basically just on an elevator pitch. And I sold the book before I'd written much of it at all. And then it was a long process of writing the book and then rewriting. And if I have any complaint about the process, it would just be the length of time it took to get word back from Tor, from Jim, on the book. But he's a very talented editor, and when I did hear from him, finally, he helped me put the book together in the way that it came out. With a firm but gentle hand, helped me put this book together.
Okay. Now, you recently read passages from Billy Moon on the Think the Impossible tour. Are you finding that there's quite a large audience for Diet Soap and as far as your readership on these tour spots? Or
I went on tour. I went to San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. I had a good turnout in San Francisco. I had a poor turnout in Chicago, and I had a really nice turnout in New York. I think the San Francisco turnout were people who were interested in the writing, who were part of the regular clientele for the bookstore, which is a genre bookstore. And then in Chicago, it was just a regular small mainstream bookstore, and no one knew I was there. And then in New York, it was mostly my podcast listeners who turned up to the left-wing bookstore that I gave a reading to. So the crossover between my readers and my listeners, how many people are both, couldn't say. Not as many as I would like. And I think that everyone who listens to my podcast should buy 2 or 3 copies of every book that I publish. I just want to put that out there.
Okay. Now, would you be interested in
none of this bargain bin stuff either? They should be paying full price.
There you go. No used purchases.
Oh.
Buy them new, $15, right?
$15 to $20 a pop, because every man, woman, and child should have a copy.
Okay. Well, I don't disagree there on with some of your work. Fall into Time actually is what really clued me into your abilities. The final story was the one that affected me most. Chomsky and the Time Box. how do you even begin to describe that, where this man becomes consumed with trying to initiate a meeting or conversation between Noam Chomsky and Terence McKenna, two totally different thinkers from totally vastly opposing schools of thought, I guess.
Right.
How did you come to that idea and then develop it? Because there's he gets a glimpse beyond the veil of time. He plays around with this box so much. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Um, well, I had wanted to write a short story about Terence McKenna and Noam Chomsky together in something for quite a long time. It had been like I write up lists of story ideas, and this had been one of my story ideas for quite a while, but I never got around to it, and finally did. Um, the reason I wanted them to talk in one of my short stories is because they were such opposite poles, but of one thing, which I think of them as being part of what is broadly known as the left, which includes people like Abby Hoffman and Timothy Leary, and also includes people like Ralph Nader and Noam Chomsky. And I thought at the time that that these people should be able to speak to each other and come to some sort of understanding, mutual understanding, so for the betterment of the whole project. Um, I don't think that in my I know in my story that does not happen at all, and my story is a story about frustration, um, and I ended up writing a time travel story about a blogger who's reviewing basically an iPhone that lets you travel through time, and the problem with the iPhone is that it's a great app or whatever, but you can't change the past because that the grandfather paradox and other things, and so you're only a tourist through history, and he's trying to break with that, and he's trying to find a subtle way to change history. And he thinks if he could get these two opposing thinkers, one a fantasist, an artist really, someone who works with the way things feel and thinking and feeling new, weird thoughts, and the other a very rigid but brilliant social critic and political critic and linguist, Noam Chomsky. If you get them together, maybe something completely new would be born of it, but that just doesn't work out.
right. Well, would you be interested in reading a passage from Billy Moon today? I believe you had one picked out,
Sure,
right?
I could read a passage from Billy Moon. You seem to like uh, the the Falling to Time. Do you want me to read a passage from that instead? I mean, I'm not hooked one on the other. Which would you rather I read?
Do you mean what Chomsky in the Time Box,
Oh
or
yeah, I could read a little from Chomsky in the Time Box since we just talked about it, or I could read from Billy Moon. Either one.
well, Chomsky in the Time Box? A lot of Eraser Red Press readers and authors are primarily my audience, but I know that Billy Moon is the most recent of your work that you wanted to get out there. So I'll leave the decision.
Okay, well I've got Billy Moon on hands right
Okay.
here, so I'll read from that. Let's see here. See if I can find a. I have one copy where I've actually marked the pages for reading, but this isn't one of those. Let's see. About halfway through the book, Chris arrives in Paris, right? And maybe I'll read from that.
Okay.
Give me a second here to find that. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. At the Sorbonne, Christopher found a pleasant cafe with sidewalk tables and red and white and blue striped umbrellas right across the street from the exasperated students who were organizing a situation. On May 2nd, Daniel Cohn-Bendit had been suspended from Nanterre in a disciplinary hearing for the actions of March 22nd. And on that same day, the Student Union Hall was burned down. Dean Grappin had appeared on television to announce that he was shutting down the campus. The students' response was transpiring as Christopher waited for his drink. Cohn-Bendit, for example, arrived with his megaphone right precisely at the same time as Christopher's mimosa, and Chris found it difficult to figure out how many francs he owed while trying to follow what Cohn-Bendit was saying. Chris's French was pretty rusty, and Cohn-Bendit's words were somewhat distorted. Chris drank his breakfast cocktail and watched. His stomach was empty, and he thought of ordering some tea to offset the effect of the champagne. But when the waiter came round again, he settled for a small cup of thick coffee. Chris glanced up at the Sorbonne Tower, at the dome, and then down again at the students on the street. The Baroque backdrop for the struggle, the Sorbonne with its columns and ornamental statues, the majesty of the institution they were opposing, this seemed to work to the students' advantage. After all, rebellions and strikes had occurred many, many times since the first revolution. Why not again? Somehow the Sorbonne made its history visible, the past visible right on the surface of the marble facade, and this made change seem possible. The students all looked quite smart. The boys had short hair and wore sports jackets and ties, while the girls had long hair and wore skirts and dresses. Chris wondered which of them was Gerard Hand. He wondered what was keeping him. The table Christopher was sitting at was grooved. There were pictures of animals, of snakes and ducks and lizards and owls, engraved into the uneven surface of the marble, and someone had left a copy of a pamphlet entitled On the Poverty of Student Life on the chair next to his. Chris let his coffee grow cold as he worked out the French text. Quote, to transform the world and to change the structure of life are one and the same thing for the proletariat. For the proletariat, revolt is a festival, or it is nothing. Chris wasn't sure if he was reading it correctly. He didn't see a clear connection between the first and second sentences. He took the letter Gerard had written from his inside pocket of his tweed jacket and separated out the altered newspaper advertisements he'd been sent from the letter itself. Disney and Schlesinger had managed to make his father's books into cartoon movies in America, and one of the advertisements for these, an advertisement for the first film entitled Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree, featured Pooh standing in front of a full-length mirror with his stubby arms over his eyes. Gerard had rubbed out the original text below the drawing and replaced them with French. Quote, all that was directly lived has receded into representation. In this context, the bear could be seen to be covering his eyes because he did not want to see his reflection. Another student now had the bullhorn. She was shouting something about Nanterre, but to Chris it seemed that they were protesting everything. They had signs against racial discrimination, against the Vietnam War, against work, against the education industry. Somebody had written in English that the workers should put their bodies on the gears and on the wheels and make it stop. The students protested everything, wanted everything. One of the students held a sign that read, "It is forbidden to forbid." Was the message meant to be strident or absurd? He remembered a line, a joke, from one of his father's books. Did you ever stop to think and forget to start again? He was talking to nobody but himself. This is not a pipe. Chris spoke the words aloud into the air. It was something he'd seen on a painting by a Belgian named Magritte, a commercial artist who, after designing wallpaper, found his way into the museums by using slick realism to create surreal questions in paintings. Chris had seen the picture of a pipe in the art section of the Times. The painting of a pipe that was not a pipe was titled The Treachery of Images. The painting had not impressed Chris, but he saw that it was clever. The only reason he remembered it was because he'd happened to read the accompanying article that claimed, cleverly or not, that the man responsible, René Magritte, was a surrealist, and that surrealism was a reaction to the horrors of war, specifically a reaction to the horror of the Great War. It was a machine gun, and in the case of Magritte, the rape of Belgium, that caused the pipe to abandon its image, and the image to abandon its pipe. The world could no longer be painted. The pipe was not a pipe. After the Great War, there had been nothing left in Europe but this feeling of being disconnected. And this is what Magritte hoped to transfer onto his canvases, like burning tubas or giant green apples. This is not a pipe, Chris said it again. On the other side of the boulevard, St. Michel, the police arrived in their kepis. I think I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, I just got high on words. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of concepts that you're throwing in there in just 4 pages.
That's one of the more dense portions, but yeah, I enjoyed writing that and playing around with those ideas. And the other thing about that is all those ideas were really on the streets in Paris in '68. It's not like my associations there are completely my own. These are ideas and problems that the students and the workers were grappling with in '68, because they were, the Situationist International was influenced by Surrealism, for instance, and they were trying to figure out a better way to live, and how to make a pipe that was really a pipe, maybe.
As for that image by Magritte, the treachery of images, and it being separated from the smoker, I guess. A few things struck me when I first read that passage yesterday in Billy Moon, and that's it seems to be a recurring image throughout the novel, and I don't know if you intended this or if you even picked up on it until I've presented it to you here. But remember in the beginning, the cat that is suddenly a stuffed cat, and he can't remember if there ever was a real cat or not. The word is not the image, So I don't know. I didn't realize, I didn't make that correlation until just now. But it's tied into the concept of the word is not the image.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm playing with a lot in the book. I think you just described what I was doing much more clearly and directly than I did. That's why I had to write a whole book to try to figure this out. The problem of, like, back to Marxism and the Enlightenment, really. The problem that we have to struggle with is how to create a way of life which will never be fully underwritten or supported by reality, by nature. This is always going to be some sort of construction that isn't quite the thing that it aims to be, and it gets it wrong. And so, the pipe, the word pipe and the image of the pipe aren't the same thing, and neither of them are an actual pipe, right? So we're always dealing with reflections and trying to come to grips with that, the necessity of that is what's going on when you try to create a new world. Because the world that you're in always seems perfectly natural. And creating something new always means creating some sort of fiction.
And perhaps even students and workers who abandon their archetypal roles, maybe they're separated as well. Maybe they're no longer the image or the role that they were supposed to play. Maybe they're separated just like the pipe from the smoker, right?
Yeah, absolutely, they are. And the problem for one of the characters, Gerard, in this book, is he's separated from the reality. He's the pipe that is not a pipe, but he continues to try to find the ground, or to find something to support him, rather than creating something new that will support him. He at one point he starts digging to try to find solid ground. I mean, literally, because he's in this dream state. It's all of Paris. It's in this weird limbo, and in the mud of Paris. And he's trying to find something firm, and he just digs and digs and digs until finally he falls out of the novel, and it becomes just letters. So, and it's kind of similar to a scene where in the Winnie the Pooh stories, where Winnie the Pooh climbs a tree, and the letters kind of make a tree. So, yeah, I mean, trying to find the solidity is can be a trap.
Now, what are your plans next? Because as you mentioned earlier, you're writing a novel, How to Watch Star Trek, with some Marxist flavoring to it.
Yeah, it's not a novel. That's just a nonfiction book I'm writing for Zero Books. So it's a straight up, kind of theory book and Star Trek book. So it's like one of those books you'd find in the philosophy and The Simpsons. Only it's How to Watch Star Trek, A Geek's Guide to Modern Life. That's one book I'm writing, and then the other one I'm going to be writing for Skyhorse. This is a novel, and I don't even have a title for it. The original title I turned in when I pitched it to Skyhorse was something like "After the Aliens Land on the White House Lawn," but that's not going to be the title. But yeah, this is going to be a story about an alien invasion after the fact, and some of the people in the story, the main characters, are going to be fictionalized versions of like Bud Hopkins or Whitley Strieber. People have been completely discredited now that the aliens have arrived because all of their ideas about what the aliens would be like were shown to be wrong. Like the worst thing that can happen to a prophet is for his prophecy to really come true in reality. This is kind of part of the idea. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of identity switching. The elevator pitch for that was it's They Live meets Dark City. So.
Wow. Well, now, how does one watch Star Trek? Give some examples of the ideas you're playing with in this other book.
Well, one of the things I would say that you want to do when you're watching Star Trek is watch out for the blinking light aliens. Whenever they show up, you have to pay close attention because they are what is known in Marxist speak as reifications. They're whatever they take on a concept, an idea, and try to pretend as though this idea can be made completely actual and concrete, and they end up, these silly blinking light aliens. So for Gene Roddenberry and Star Trek, the blinking light aliens are often, pure enlightened consciousness, without any material limits, and anyhow, so that is a concept which, when shown on the screen, has to have material limits. So, you have to, it's kind of funny what they come up with to make something that is, by definition, not concrete, appear as a concrete object on screen. So that would be one thing I would tell people to watch for, is look for the blinking light aliens. But really, in order to watch Star Trek correctly, you're going to have to buy the book. You have to read the whole thing. And while you're at it, read Hegel.
Do you think that? So you think that Hegel is the everyman's philosopher, that anyone can apply his ideas to whatever they're trying to get through?
I think he's really hard. He's difficult to read. I think his ideas are significant in that it would behoove everybody, especially people who are on the left and are in the working class, to understand Hegel. But it's not like I'm saying it's easy. I kind of think he's a schmuck because he writes in such a way that he makes things that are already difficult maybe even more difficult than they have to be. Having wrestled with his book for a while, I feel that way. But I don't know. I would say I like Slavoj Žižek a lot, who's a contemporary philosopher, the Elvis of theory today, who writes about Hegel, and maybe in a way that's more accessible. But I think you need to read the phenomenology. I mean, if you want to understand Hegel.
Okay. Now, Slavoj Žižek is another individual who is brought up quite a bit on Diet Soap. What is his school of thought, and what is his vision of what we should be doing? I mean,
well, I don't know if he has a vision of what we should be doing, but what his school of thought is he's a psychoanalyst and a philosopher and a Marxist and a Hegelian and a Lacanian. Now, those things all, sometimes I'm repeating myself, but he likes to point out, let me think if I can give you a good example of the kind of thing that he'll say that kind of, he likes to take everyday reality and show how it's really caught up in ideology, or how ideology works. He'll illustrate how ideology works through an everyday example. So, for instance, the idea of the fetish, which is in Freud and in Marx in different ways. He will use laugh tracks on sitcoms as an example of a fetish. So a fetish isn't something that gets you to do something. It's something that does it for you. So if you're watching a sitcom with a laugh track, it's the idea of the laugh track isn't to get you to laugh, but it's more that the show is laughing for you. So you can watch it, relax, you don't even have to laugh, but at the end of the show, you'll feel like you've had a good time and laughing. That's a fetish.
Huh.
So, I'm not explaining all of Zizek's thought here, but he's someone who likes to work with contemporary culture and movies to explain how contradictory and weird everyday life is, and to critique the left, to critique people on the left for being too one-sided in their thinking.
Okay. You mentioned before,
Yeah.
do you...
How do you feel this is going so far? Am I making any sense? Or?
Oh, yeah, I think it's fantastic. I know that I'm probably the one that comes off looking the lesser of the two, but I think it's going fantastic.
I feel, and you can leave this stuff, I feel it's difficult sometimes to explain someone like Hegel, for instance, without sounding either pompous or like you're full of jargon, even if you don't really. Then I will succeed it, not just for them, but for myself. So I feel like, you ask very good questions, and sometimes my answers are obscure in ways I wouldn't want them to be.
No, I'm pleased with it so far. Surrealism it's like a coat of many colors, because a lot of people have a different idea of what it should be. Some people feel it should evade all possible definition or meaning, and like someone who's been a guest on Diet Soap frequently, and then you have I guess those who I so often have as guests who take Eraserhead Press and David Lynch as the go-to source of surrealism, a more modern sensibility of surrealism. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Well, I don't think that it should evade all definitions. I tend to think of surrealism as having a kind of a feeling associated with it, and also having an historical moment where it was defined. Certainly David Lynch and the Bizarro writing has a surrealist flavor, or has a feeling, and brings on a lot of the same feelings of looking at a surrealist painting might. Surrealism in history was an art movement that had political ambitions. Andre Breton wanted to create art in the service of the revolution, and to use dreams and juxtapositions and strange associations to get beyond bourgeois understanding of life and find something else, a different way of thinking, a different way of living. I think surrealism has had its limits as an art movement, and certainly as a philosophy, but the feeling of it is still so vital that I can't help but still want to be associated with it. But the Situationists in the 60s, who are characters in my novel, they had a very strong critique of the surrealists, even as they were trying to pick up the same ideas and run with them. But the first thing they did was, not maybe the first thing they did, but one of the things they did was critique surrealism. And one of the Situationists was a guy named Raoul Vaneigem, and he wrote about a book on the surrealists, which I think is largely accurate. So that surrealism has their limits, but surrealism now is a marketing category, and it's all about the way people feel, the strangeness that people feel with certain kinds of works of art, and certainly that feeling is I think necessary.
Okay, now in closing, Doug, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit.
Okay.
We mentioned earlier Magritte's treachery of images, this pipe is not a pipe, and then in Billy Moon, the students and workers who revolt are no longer students and workers, and the cat that is not a cat in the beginning of Billy Moon. When I upload this show, is it still Douglas Lain talking, or is it a disembodied form of Douglas Lain?
it's not really me. I'm not really there. Um, yeah, it's what I put together to talk to people on podcasts, and it's a recording of that. But we can't ever deal directly with. You wouldn't want to meet the real Douglas Lain. He's full of bile and pus and nonsense. It's just some little creature. But we have these ability to have thoughts and to speak words that kind of go beyond us, and they're not as real as we are in one way, and the other way they're more real. So yeah, I feel that we have to get comfortable with what isn't quite fully there, and still be able to reason about it without just falling into the way it makes us feel. But yes, you're dealing with a spectacle, all of you listeners, right now. I'm part of the spectacle, for sure.
Great answer. Well, Douglas, is there any final message you'd like to impart to the listeners before we conclude?
I don't have a message that I can just sum up with, but I would say, if you know a Marxist, be nice to him. Maybe buy him a cup of coffee. It's a hard life.
Well, I wish you the best with your guide on how to watch Star Trek, and also your untitled Alien novel that is in progress.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that you do return to Eraser Ed Press or Lazy Fascist at some point in your future, because I feel there's still a lot left to say using that facilitator. So.
Well, I will keep that in mind. I want to finish a book for Lazy Fascist and called The Doom That Came to Lolcats someday, and that's on the back burner as well. So I'll keep that in mind.
All right. Thanks for joining me, Doug.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
And there you have it. Douglas Lain. He came, he saw, he conquered. I'm amazed at how well that went. There are a lot of pitfalls in philosophy where we may struggle to understand, but I think we both reached the other in quite a preferable way. Now, before I conclude this episode, I just want to give a shout out to my guests next week, episode 4 will be an all Bizarro Pulp Press podcast, and joining me will be Shane Cartledge with his sophomore effort in the Bizarro genre, and that is Day of the Milkman, and Grant Womack also with his sophomore effort through Bizarro Pulp Press entitled A Lamplight's Lament, and I can't wait to talk to both gentlemen. They're still wet behind the ears, but I think that they have a lot to offer Bizarro, and really looking forward to that. And in later weeks, I promise to be speaking to Laird Barron, Noah Cicero, Scott McClanahan, so many unbelievable talents that have agreed to come on this program. I don't know what I did to deserve it, but Kirsten Aline Pierce and many others that I'm waiting to hear back from. And on that note, thanks again for joining us, and now go out and feel something.